Greetings, Indie Warriors! Start your engines! It's time for another review here at I Dream of Indie, and today we're taking a look at arcade racing game Slipstream on the Nintendo Switch. The late 80s, early 90s were a very special time for arcade-style racing games. You, of course, had Outrun, which I absolutely loved. I had Ridge Racer on my PlayStation at home. Eventually, I got Gran Turismo, but I was actually never much of a fan of the more realistic-style racers, always preferring the arcade action, even games like Cruisin' USA. I loved all of that stuff. Slipstream here is a really neat tribute to those games, and it's very well made with a lot of great content. There's no real story to be discussed here, but if it wasn't obvious, this is very much a tribute to the late 80s, early 90s, not just in the gameplay and the look of the title, but in the way that it sounds as well. The game does feature a few different characters. You can actually select between these if you're playing the game in co-op, which is up to 4 players in split-screen local, but it does feel like a little bit of a missed opportunity that none of these characters are developed. They don't really have much in terms of personality. They'll shout out a few lines here or there on some of the tracks depending on which game mode you're playing, but that's really it. All of that said, story's not really going to be that important in a racing game like this, is it? No, you're here for the arcade action, and in that regard, the game certainly delivers, feeling very similar to arcade games of the past. Outrun is the best one that I could compare this one to. Just reminded me of that title a lot, but there's also comparisons to be made here for even games like Mario Kart. You're not shooting weapons or anything like that, but in terms of the way this game scrolls and such. And of course, the power sliding. Just as you would expect from an arcade-style racer, the controls are not going to be very complex here at all. You accelerate by holding down the A button, you can brake with B, and then you steer with the stick. Where the real challenge of this game comes from is in the drifting, and oh boy, you're going to be doing a lot of drifting. You'll go into that drift by releasing the gas and then quickly pressing on the brake and then hitting the gas once again, all while you are turning into a corner. So it sounds really simple, but it actually takes a good amount of practice to get good at this. Thankfully, there is an automatic mode as well, which will do all of the drifting for you, but it does come at a little bit of cost. You won't gain quite as much speed. The most unique feature for this title would be what it's named after, the Slipstream. You actually gain this ability by riding closely behind other racers. Eventually, that fills up your Slipstream meter, which will cause you to be boosted, and you'll go a lot faster. This will also reduce your air drag, but be warned that the moment you touch anything, this will deactivate your Slipstream. It's kind of neat, nothing really special. It just kind of reminded me of when you hit one of those turbo boost markers in other arcade racing games that speeds you up, but they tried something different and it doesn't really hurt the gameplay. I should also mention that this game has a rewind feature. If you mess up, you can use that and go back about 5 seconds, but you can't spam away at this. It is limited. The idea here, I imagine, was to cause the player less frustration, and I think it's successful in doing so. I enjoyed the feature myself. Slipstream does have a lot of different game modes, and I love that it had local co-op for actually up to 4 players in split screen too. Unfortunately, there was no online play here in the Nintendo Switch version. The first mode is going to be the Grand Tour, which has you going through 5 different areas. They're all connected, which I thought was really neat. You're trying to pass by a rival racer. That's the main goal in order to stay alive for all 5 stages. Eventually, you do come to a fork in the road, and you can actually pick left or right, and that will bring you to a different stage. There's a good variety of stages in this game too, so it's a really neat mode. The single race mode is more or less what you would expect. You can pick a different stage to race on, pick your car, and just go to it. Then we have the Grand Prix Championship mode, which is something that you might be familiar with if you've played any of the Mario Kart games. You're trying to win the cup by scoring the most points, and you get those points by ranking higher on each race. A fun little spin on things here is that you can actually choose between a stock car, which means you won't be doing any upgrades to it and everyone will be on the same level, or you can go into a custom cars mode here, which will allow you to pump money that you earn in between each race into your vehicle to make it better. It's nothing special, but it is kind of cool. I should also note that with all of these modes, you can choose between 3 different difficulties as well. Rounding things out, we have a cannonball mode, which is more of a rally style race. I was not a big fan of this one. You have time trials, of course, and then there's a battle royale. If you're the last car, as in you finish last on a given race, then you're going to be eliminated. So yeah, try not to be last. It's kind of fun. Of these modes, the ones that are available in local split screen are Grand Prix, Single Race, Cannonball, and Battle Royale. I thought all of the modes were entertaining enough. I love that the split screen is an option here, but you gotta be willing to deal with a lot of drifting. That is a big focus of this game, almost to the point of nauseum on certain tracks. I didn't mind so much myself, and the game feels pretty good in terms of controls, but yeah, be prepared to drift. It's key to victory, and there's a lot of it. And as I touched on earlier, the manual drifting does take a while to get a hang of, so I know a lot of you out there are going to want to avoid the automatic because you like to play your racing games and have full control, but it's not a bad starting point, to be honest, especially if you're playing an arcade racer just to have fun like I am and you don't necessarily want the frustration of learning that mechanic. But it's really good to have options. This game is fairly tough. Even if you go up to the medium setting, these racers are going to give you the race of your life, and sometimes when you run into them, that can be trouble because it bounces them way forward and gives them a huge advantage. Sometimes I was running a really good race and I still couldn't catch them. This game is not super easy. That said, it's hard to argue with the value proposition here. There are a lot of tracks and there's a ton of game modes. You could argue for maybe a few more cars, but that's a little bit nitpicking. For those of you that are worried about the Nintendo Switch performance, I'm happy to report that I didn't run into any snags here. I wasn't able to test 3 or 4 player split screen, but in 2 player split screen, we didn't have any slowdown whatsoever. The game ran fine. I didn't run into any kind of hitches, no glitches, no crashes. Seemed like a well-made product in terms of performance. I also really enjoyed the visuals. Definitely, again, a callback to Outrun. I know I've referenced that game a few times at this point, but that is truly what this graphical style reminds me of. That mix of 2D meets 3D engine is neat. It's apparently a custom engine of sorts, so it runs really well. Pretty good track variety here too. You'll go through graveyards, forests, you'll go through cities, beaches, that kind of thing. It might make you a little bit dizzy if you stare at it too long, but overall, I like the visuals. A good callback to 80s, 90s arcade racers. Doesn't hurt that it has a nice retro synth soundtrack. All of these tracks were wonderful. Some of them are a little bit more low-key, while some of them are more energetic, you could say, but they're all wonderful to listen to. The squealing of the car sounds great. Everything sounds nice in this game. Great presentation overall. If you're like me and you grew up on these arcade racers, Slipstream is a game that's going to hit you right in the feels. It has a great presentation. I think the controls are pretty good. A lot of drifting in this one though. Do be prepared for that. There's also a lot of modes, so I feel like it's a game that will keep you busy for a long time. If you have some friends that want to play the game locally, that's a great option too. So well recommended. But do know that this is very much an arcade throwback 80s, 90s style racing game. If you're looking for something a little more realistic and modern, you're definitely not going to get that here, but you're going to get a really fun arcade racer. Thank you so much for watching the latest video from I Dream of Indie. It really helps us to bring a voice to the voiceless ones in gaming. We'd now like to shout out those brave indie warriors and legends that make this channel possible. At the Indie Warriors tier, Bill T, Christian Cruz, Kevalo, Adriana Amato, CJR, PSC, Julian Colbus, Jesse, Ray Lynn, Marky Mint, Dave Hart, Peekaboo, Lex Noyle, Carmine Red, King of the Hatch, and Blue Francis 14. Those brave indie legends, Jen Rose, Larkison, Mitchell Hall, Eric Peach, Skepticism, C. Coyle, Nathan Moore, Chris Jackson, and Mr. W. Thank you so much for everything that you do for independent developers, for publishers, and for I Dream of Indie. Everybody else, please head down to the description box below. Let's defeat this gaming echo chamber and bring a voice to the voiceless ones in gaming.